Welcome to Business 125. Today we're going to go through the final chapter of the book, Chapter 17, Estate Planning. We're going to try to understand the importance of estate planning, understand the purpose of a will, and understand some strategies to avoid probate. As with all these, I'm going to touch on these very quickly. Let me preface this by saying I'm not a lawyer. Mostly I want to try to give you an overview so that you know what questions to ask when you talk to a lawyer about your situation. Just some background. There's four players in all these situations. There's you, there's your stuff or your assets or your estate, there's your heirs, and there's the government. A couple stages you could be in. You could be healthy. That's simple. If you're healthy, you're in control of your stuff. You could be incapacitated. In that case, who controls your stuff? And you could die, and then who gets your stuff? Okay? So the estate is, of course, your assets minus your liabilities. Your heirs are several of your relatives normally. The government's role will tax the estate and also to make decisions if there's no documentation to tell them to do otherwise. This differs by state, is not simple. I encourage you to get help as you do this. If you're incapacitated, who controls your health care? Well, if there's no legal document, the government's going to control it, the doctors, via the Hippocratic Oath. A couple options you have. Well, one option is to do nothing. A very reactionary action is to ask for guardianship. This is after the person's incapacitated. A proactive way would be to have a health care proxy or a living will, which describes what your health care wishes are. And you'll also want to probably name an agent called a healthcare durable power of attorney to make decisions on your behalf. Same thing for your finances. Who's going to control them? You want to think long and hard about setting up power of attorney, because power of attorney gives somebody the right to do whatever they wish with your financials. It's basically giving somebody a blank check. So when you sit down with your lawyer or your professional, you want to understand, what are you going to do in a healthcare situation where you're incapacitated? Next thing is death. There's several ways to distribute your estate. Could be defined because you joint own or something. If I own the house with my wife gets the house. Could be defined in the contract by a beneficiary. Could be oftentimes insurance. Who's the beneficiary of the insurance policy? There are trusts that we'll go into that can designate. And finally, there's a will. Now, the thing about a will is probate comes into play with wills, as the book describes, which basically is government's way of making sure that the will is executed properly. But with that comes a fee of somewhere between 2 and 5% of the estate. So oftentimes people, to avoid that fee, want to avoid probate in this process, which we'll talk about. All right, let's understand estate tax. It's changing frequently. Currently, it's at 35% on estates over $5 million. It may change depending upon what the Congress does. But for most of us, I dare say we won't have estates over $5 million. But if you do, some strategies is you can give it away while you're alive, $13,000 per year per person. There's a marital deduction, unlimited. And there's generating skipping transfers. All of these you want to understand if you got to worry about the $5 million. Stakes are large. Get professional help. Wills and options. A will's a legal document that describes where you want your property to go. But to understand probate, understand that the joint ownership comes first, then the beneficiary, then your trust, and what's left over is what's in your will. These three things are distributed first. Then it's whatever the rules that are written in the will. So if you want to avoid probate, you minimize the amount of the will by having lots of joint ownership. If that makes sense to you, make gifts, name beneficiaries, potentially have trusts, even though those cost money too. But all of these are options to think about as you sit down with a professional to decide what you want to do with your estate. Hope that helps. Have a good week.